Well, greetings and salutations, everyone. Happy Halloween. And this is one of two uploads for today. Before we get into it, though, a couple links. As you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, and hopefully very soon my merch store to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Those links are in the description below. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1, 2, and 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeffrey Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, the links to which are also in the description as well. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's get on with today's upload. Shall we? Today's first part of this Halloween upload is a subscriber submission. It was July in 1975. I was 16, living in a small town just west of Rochester, New York. I had seen a flyer promoting a Catholic youth organization in Rochester, a 5-day hiking trip in the high peaks region of the Adirondacks. My parents agreed that I could go. There were about 10 hikers and 3 counselors. The first 4 days and nights were fun but relatively uneventful. Hours on the trail, rarely meeting anyone else on the trail, living on freeze-dried food, jerky, pemmican, and fruit leather, sleeping in trailside lean-tos or setting up our tents around a fire. The last full day was spent on an ascent of Mount Marcy. We spent the last night at the base of the mountain. Our tents were set up in a semicircle around the fire. We sat around the fire, singing the obligatory songs, telling stories, joking, laughing. We were all in good spirits. One by one, everyone retired to their tents. My tent mate went as well, leaving me alone by the fire. As usual, I was the last one left by the fire. I always loved the night, especially when in the woods. So many people don't realize how alive the woods are at night. The animals scurrying through the leaf litter on the forest floor, the occasional call of the night bird, roosting birds changing positions. On this night, there was all of that, and off in the distance, there was one of my favorite nature sounds, the haunting call of the loon. I sat there looking into the fire for quite some time, feeling happy that I had a wonderful time, but also slightly sad that it was ending tomorrow. Presently, I noticed how quiet it had become. All the sounds of nature had ceased. Even the cry of the loon from the distant pond. The only sound was the crackling of the fire. I looked to my right and scanned the semicircle of tents. As I was doing this, I sensed movement out of the corner of my left eye. Turning my head, I saw about 20 feet away, peering out from between the trunks of 2 huge trees, what appeared to be the profile of a very large wolf's head, about 6 feet off the ground. Pointy muzzle, large upright ears. Its right eye reflected the light from the fire. For a brief moment, I was too startled and amazed to be afraid. It's incredible how quick the human mind can work, and how many things you can try to process at one time. I remember thinking, too big for a coyote. There are no wolves left in this area. If there are, they don't climb trees, and they are not 6 feet tall. I said the moment of amazement was very brief. It was replaced by fear so intense that I felt it in the pit of my stomach. The type of fear that feels almost electric and makes certain parts of the male anatomy shrink and want to crawl back up inside of you. Yet, even with this fear, my mind was still going 1,000,000 miles an hour, just trying to let it sink in. I could see its right shoulder. What would be the deltoid muscle on a human looked huge, as did its bicep. Its elbow was hidden by the tree trunk. I could see its forearm. It was held out horizontally. It looked somewhat slender, and its hand, not paw, but hand with long fingers ending in claws, hung down at a 90-degree angle. As odd as this was, what was even odder still was there seemed to be a primitive yet roughly made woven basket hanging from its wrist. It turned its head in my direction and tilted its head and looked at me from under its brow directly into my eyes. There was no bluish reflection as you'd get from a coyote when their eyes are illuminated at night, nor did they glow red as my huskies used to. They were a shiny black, like obsidian, reflecting the light from the fire. Our eyes met. I was hit with this immediate sense that it did not want me watching it, and also a deep feeling that it was disdainful of me and humans in general, and that if it wanted to, it could take me, and I would disappear into the night forever. I knew I had to get out of its sight, and fast. Since the first day of the trip, it had been drilled into our heads that the last person to leave the fire had to douse it. For this purpose, we had 2 buckets that we filled every evening, one with water and one with dirt. As I was the last one to go to bed, the buckets were next to me. All I wanted to do was dive into my tent. I didn't want to scream or yell. I sincerely doubt I would have been able to, or douse the fire. I just wanted to get to where it couldn't see me, and more importantly, I couldn't see it. Yet the rational part of my brain told me that I didn't want to be responsible for burning down a large chunk of the Adirondack Park. I grabbed the bucket of water with my right hand, and I launched backwards from my cross-legged sitting position. I threw the entire bucket into the fire. The hissing sound and the plume of steam are still very clear to me this day. The tent was no more than 10 feet directly behind me as I scrambled inside. I yanked the zipper down, and as I got deep into my sleeping bag as I could get and assumed the fetal position. That's all I remembered until morning. I was in my sleeping bag, head, shoulders, and arms outside of it. I heard birds singing in the morning song, and the tent was slightly illuminated by the gray dawn. As I went to sit up, I realized the tent flap was unzipped, and the lower half of my body was outside of the tent. As I arose, I heard muted voices coming from a few tents, but no one else had come out yet. I walked a bit away to find a tree to pee behind, and when I returned, one of the counselors had gotten up and prepared breakfast. They asked me if I had slept well. I hesitated and told them I had. My tent mate came out. I asked him if he had heard anything during the night. He said no. By that afternoon, we were on a bus and on our way home. I never told any of the group about what had happened. I never told anyone for decades. Pondered this event for years, analyzed it. I was thinking werewolf, but the only concept I had was Hollywood version, or the medieval accounts of werewolves, such as Peter Stubb. The accounts of them had them assuming the forms of wolves, not something half man, half wolf. The Hollywood versions of werewolves back then were basically just hairy guys with fangs until movies like The Howling came out, with creatures similar to what I had seen, but only similar. I could not, and still cannot, wrap my head around people physically transforming into wolves. As the years passed, while I still thought about it occasionally, I was busy working my ass off and distracted by life in general. Until I heard about Linda Godfrey and the Beast of Bray Road. Bingo! But I still never told anyone about my encounter. Years ago, while watching TV with my wife, I came across this show, Monster Quest. The episode was about the American werewolf. I was riveted, so much so that my wife tapped me on my shoulder and said, "For the 3rd time, do you want some ice cream?" My response was to turn to her and say, "That's what I saw." Then I told her of my encounter. I'm pretty sure she believes it was just my imagination back then, but she patted my shoulder and said something about, "I believed I saw it, then I believed I saw it." I've read dozens, if not hundreds, of encounters online and in books since then. I found your channel a while back when I googled Dogman Encounters Adirondacks. I'll email you again with the account of a 2-dimensional silhouette creature that seemed dog-like, yet also hyena-like. This was in Newburgh, New York, in the mid-'80s. Thank you. P. Funny thing about Mount Marcy, I'm going to give you a little info about it. My mom hiked it when she was about 6 months pregnant with me. The mountain is the highest point in New York, part of the High Peaks Wilderness area. It's 5,344 feet. It's in the Keene Valley region, which is by Lake Placid. An interesting little tidbit of history. The vice president, Theodore Roosevelt, was at his hunting camp on September 14th in 1901 after summiting Marcy when he was first informed that President William McKinley had been shot a week earlier and had taken a serious turn for the worst. Roosevelt and his party hiked 10 miles down the southwest face of the mountain to Newcomb, New York, where they hired a stagecoach to take them to the closest train station at North Creek. At some point along the route, Roosevelt learned that McKinley had died, and Roosevelt took the train to Buffalo to be sworn in as president. That route between Newcomb and North Creek has been designated as the Roosevelt-Marcy Trail. I am looking forward to having this gentleman share his other encounter. I'm actually looking forward to hopefully having him on the show. Maybe I can narrate the second encounter, but then have him come on and share both in his words. I'd love to hear this encounter out of his words, because it's truly an amazing encounter. I'm fascinated about this creature that he saw having a basket. It's very interesting. And for those of you who don't know, I live in the Adirondacks. I was born and raised here. And if you don't know what the Adirondacks are, I really suggest Googling them, because it is probably one of the most beautiful places in America. And I'm not just saying it because I'm from here, but it truly is. So moving on to the next part of the upload. Today's second terrifying part of this Halloween upload. I live alone, and I've done so for about a year now after breaking up with my ex. And it's been mostly great to have my own space in my own home where I feel free to do whatever I want, whenever I want. That being said, I spend most of my time in the evenings upstairs playing video games and watching YouTube videos. I don't really have a social life, but that's okay with me. I've never felt uneasy in my own home until about a month ago, when I went to the kitchen at night to make a drink. Now my kitchen is overlooked by my overgrown garden, which is in turn overlooked by some woods. It's a fairly rural neighborhood, and it's very quiet at night, which makes it a friendlier environment for some of the wildlife to come out. I often see fox and deer, and I've been woken up at night by the scream of a fox at 4 a.m. once. And they like to hang around outside the front of my house because there's easy access from there to the back garden, and then into the woods. The kitchen has this big window which looks right into the garden, but at night when the lights are on, I can barely see more than a few feet ahead of the window, as it acts sort of like a mirror. Well, on this particular night, the few feet ahead of me that I could see was all this thing needed to make itself visible to me. I hadn't noticed it until I looked up and out the window after making my drink. It was a bipedal creature, skinny but very tall with hind legs. It had no hair. It sounds ridiculous to say this, but it looked similar to the werewolf Lupin transformed into the Prisoner of Azkaban movie, only taller and more humanoid, and its mouth was tiny but protruded, similar to a canine's. It had no ears from what I could see. It just stayed there looking at me with these completely white, tiny eyes. Its head was tilted to the side, and its bottom jaw was slightly open. I didn't even know how long it had been there. I was in my kitchen for about a minute before I even bothered to look out the window. I just froze. You can think you can rationalize what you do in a situation like this, but I was frozen in terror. I was telling myself to move, but my body felt icy cold and I could not do a thing. Eventually, after maybe 10 seconds, it felt much longer, I managed to move and run out of the room, not daring to take my eyes off the creature, and as I did so, its head rotated to follow me as I left to the comfort and safety of the upstairs, which was the creepiest thing about it. Now, since that night, which has been about a month ago, I have not gone into my kitchen at night, save for a few necessary occasions. I prepare everything I need before it gets dark, and then stay upstairs for the rest of the night. If I absolutely need to go into the kitchen, I'll rush so that I can get out as soon as possible. That feeling you get when you turn all the lights off before you go back upstairs and feel like you're going to be chased upstairs by some unknown entity. That's the feeling I get when I need to go to my kitchen at night. Today's third encounter. I live in a small town in northeastern Pennsylvania that's surrounded by farms and endless forests. As a kid, I spent most of my time fishing for trout or building stick forts. Now I have bonfires and hunt deer, so as you can imagine, I'm outside most of the time. At this point, I know almost every paw print or call of the local animals, and I can identify it almost immediately. At the age of 13, I went over to one of my friend's houses for his birthday party, mid-June, alongside another two guys. We used to hang out a lot, but after this incident, things happened and we broke apart and went our own ways. Anyways, we were crazy and imagining exploring abandoned places and finding paranormal spirits, as all the YouTubers did at the time. About 3 miles into the forest, there was this abandoned quarry. All of us were excited to explore it, so we got the birthday boy, his name was Aiden, to lie to his dad and say we were going for a walk through the woods. Aiden's dad said yes, but not to wander too far and to pay attention to the trees due to the number of mountain lion sightings in the area recently. Now, many people say they do not live in Pennsylvania, said to be a boogeyman of some sorts, but I've seen one with my own eyes, and I can tell you that they are here, along with wolves. We gear up, grab our phones and knives. Well, at the time, I didn't have a knife, but I borrowed one from one of the older guys. His name was Clayton. He was a little out of shape, putting it nicely. Usually brought up to 10 knives to our parties, like some sort of serial killer. Sometimes he made me worry. He always gave one of our fourth guy, named Marcel, more ghetto than country boy, but it's okay. We got along at the time. As we packed our bags and got ready to poke fun at each other, I insulted Aiden's choice of footwear. He was wearing a pair of black and white Vans, while the rest of us wore boots. Clayton poked fun at me for being the smallest guy in the group, and Marcel backed him up. As we were heading out the door, excited for what we were going to find in the amazing abandoned quarry, imagining old mine shafts deep into the ground where coal was mined or copper, the air seemed to change as in heavier, like when a kid in class threatens to kill everyone in the room. Yeah, that kind of heavy. Almost a primitive fear. As I eerily looked around, curious at what installed this primitive fear into my system, the others talked about what we were going to find. As we are walking through the woods after going through a long field, the feeling of dread was getting stronger. I almost wanted to run. I knew I was being watched. I always know when someone stares at me in class. I usually look directly at them when I notice the feeling. I started to scan my surroundings. Maple trees, rocks, cliffs, bones, birds, beehives. Wait, bones? I backtracked to where I saw the bones and looked a little closer. About 60 yards away at the bottom of a cliff was a dead deer. Fresh, blood still on its bones, flesh hanging from its skull. I imagined the thing that could have mutilated it so badly. Nothing exactly exciting happened as we climbed the large hill. I felt the air get heavier from my primal fear clawing its way to my spine as if it was about to dig itself out. Once we reached the top of the hill, there was a level part, still filled with maple and birch and some decent-sized rock. There was a barbed wire fence that led to a clearing. Freshly mowed, like field, Aiden commented, saying that this was his property and his neighbor probably was trespassing again. As we got to the fence, I noticed something red hanging from the fence. A rag or a piece of clothing, covered in dried blood. And underneath it was rusted, old knife, which I saw a blade on one side and a sharp edge on the other. I and Marcel argued for a minute about who got the knife, and I gave in and let him have it. Under the fence and walked through the field. Right then, we were about a half a mile from the quarry. I zoned out again as we walked. No one was talking about anything exciting anyway. I was scanning my surroundings when fear jumped almost right out of me. I couldn't place it as I frantically looked around. Something bad, no, something evil was nearby, and I could sense it. I was at the back of the line, so no one noticed my panic. I went to tree, scanning for something out of place, and when I got to the birch tree, roughly 25 yards away, is when I saw it. There was a large, lengthy, gray hand wrapped around the tree. I could almost make out the claws. I looked above the hand, and I could just barely see the edge of the head. I looked at my friends, who got a little bit ahead of me, looked back at the tree, and the gray thing was gone. I ran to catch up with my friends, deciding to keep what I saw quiet, so I'm not made fun of for the rest of the weekend. We finally started to see a clearing up ahead, with another barbed wire fence. We walked through a patch of thorn bush, about as tall as me, and it shredded our bare torsos as we took off our shirts to hang them on our shoulders. We crouched under the fence and made it to the quarry. We all spun around towards the woods, hearing his dad, but it was off, almost mechanical. Startled by how quiet it was, almost a whisper, but the woods were 100 yards away. My fear crawled its way into me, and I wanted to go home, knowing something was wrong. Guys, we need to go, I stated. Walking toward the tree line, the others followed. My fear grew stronger and stronger. I scanned the field, then the cliff, then the trees. As I was walking, we were at the tree line, scrambling under the fence. Snap! A branch cracked not far from us. We all looked. Marcel, still under the fence, and we saw it. 20 yards away was a 9-foot human-like creature. No, not an animal. It stood on 2 legs like a human. Its gray, skinny arms ended at its knees, and its claws were as big as its hands. It was partially crouched, perching its elbows on its knees, staring at us with its hot red eyes. Teeth stuck out of its mouth like a piranha with large canines like a dog. Its teeth were an ugly yellow and blackish color, with some blood stains on the top row. We all stood frozen and stared at this beast. Then its eyes snapped to mine. It made eye contact and twitched. In fear, I let out a gasp. Its eyes perked up as it heard this, as if in pleasure. It slowly stood up, breaking my trance, and I jumped into flight mode. Run, I screamed, making a dash for home. The field, only 20 yards away, the creature let out this almost metallic, human, bear-like roar. Its scream filled me with fear, and I could sense the hate in its veins. This monster was primal fear. We ran like hell as it chased after us, dodging left and right, changing directions, tripping it up so it couldn't catch us. We dove under the barbed wire fence and kept running. I looked back to see it hurdle the fence like it was nothing, hot on our heels, running on all fours. I tripped over a branch and rolled, catching myself, and kept running. But this put me at the back of the line again. I let out another scream and jumped off the nearby cliff to my right. My friends did the same. It was only a 15-foot drop onto some dead leaves and grass, so we landed somewhat nicely. Except I rolled my ankle in the process, and Aiden landed on his knee on a rock. I looked back and saw that I had almost landed on the deer corpse from earlier, and that gave me a spark of renewed energy. The tree line was only 300 yards away. We ran like hell. We heard it screeching and scrambling down the hill at full speed. We were vaulting over rocks and sliding under fallen trees. This thing was right on us the whole time. Its teeth were bared and roaring in hatred. I knew the only goal this abomination had was to mutilate us like a deer. We ran and ran. It roared again, this time sounding almost in defeat. We cleared the tree line and ran to the road. We turned back around to see where it was, and it stood in the tree line, almost out of view, but still visible enough to see it. Evan croaked in a voice so unnatural and satanic, almost like the demons in movies, but more metallic. I didn't mention this before, but my name is Evan. My friends always call each other mean things, so we rarely say our real names. Instead of primal fear this time, I felt primal rage. I turned and yelled at it. This thing simply smiled, turned around, and walked away. We all looked at each other and went back to the house. Aiden's dad didn't hear the scream, so we had to explain nothing. We went and hid in his room in silence. None of us really talked about it much more except me. If I was to ask them now about it, they would probably say it was just a bear and that we had all overreacted. Today's final encounter happened exactly a half a mile from the house I grew up in. There is a dead-end road at the end of a road called Nolan Road. And, Nolan Road is a dead-end road, excuse me. And it goes down this hill to this boat launch. And back in the day, there used to be some sand pits down there and some really good fishing spots and a boat launch and stuff like that. People used to camp out in the woods out there. But, yeah, I figured I'd end this terrifying first part of the Halloween uploads with this creepy one in my neck of the woods. Moreau, New York, late 70s or early 80s. I'm in my 40s. My dad saw a Bigfoot on Nolan Road in Moreau, New York. This is the account he gives. The story is secondhand. To set the scene a little, the narrow road, Nolan Road, descends along a somewhat steep hill down to the Hudson River. Where the sighting occurred, there are woods that cover a sharp incline, 70 degrees or so, to the right of the road, and a complete drop-off into the woods to the left. The creature was completely covered in dark hair, and it came running on two legs, but moving more like a bear than a man, down from the hill to the right across the road, and then it jumped feet first over the drop-off to the left. I was with my dad at the time, but I didn't see it as I was reading in the back seat of the car. He told me to look back, but it was gone by the time I did. We followed the road down around the corner to come out to the river and looked into the woods from our car to hopefully see it again. But we couldn't see a thing. We decided not to get out of the car and go home after looking for a while. Total time of the sighting was 2 seconds or more. We never mentioned it except to a couple of friends and relatives, but a couple months later, a couple of teenage girls reported seeing a Bigfoot in nearby Washington County. I'm not sure exactly where. The sheriff's office investigated, and an officer claims to have seen the creature as well. I believe the story was in the Post-Star newspaper, but I can't find it online in the archive of articles from the paper. I can't remember the year, but it was during the very late 70s or early 80s. Alright guys, like I said, this is one of 2 Halloween uploads, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed bringing it to you. With that, I want to thank everybody. I want to wish everyone a happy Halloween and encourage everyone to be kind to each other. And with that, may the Great Spirit watch over you and guide you through your path of life. And with that, see ya!